For decades, Florida was the escape every Canadian dreamed of. Sunshine in January, golf instead of shoveling snow, Disney instead of icy streets back home. Every winter, millions of Canadians turned Florida into their second home. But something changed. Those loyal visitors began to disappear. Hotels stood half empty. Restaurants that once buzzed with Canadian accents fell quiet. Golf courses, once booked solid, suddenly had openings. Florida didn't just lose tourists, it lost its winter heartbeat. And many Floridians never realized just how much Canada kept their economy alive until it was gone. Did Florida take Canadian tourism for granted? Today, we are uncovering how the collapse of this decades-long relationship is shaking Florida's tourism industry to its core, and what it really means when Canadians stop coming. Florida and Canada's love affair goes back more than half a century. Since the 1950s, when commercial flights became more affordable and highways stretched deeper south, Canadians began flocking to Florida in waves. At first, it was retirees, pensioners who had spent their lives shoveling snow and braving icy winds. They discovered something extraordinary, a state where the sun still shone in January, where golf courses never closed, and where the only ice you had to deal with came in your cocktail glass. Thus began the tradition of the snowbirds, Canadians who escaped their brutal winters by migrating south each year like clockwork. Soon, it wasn't just retirees. Canadian families embraced Florida as their dream vacation. Fort Lauderdale became a magnet for spring breakers, Miami offered its glitz and nightlife, Orlando blossomed into a global family destination with Disney and Universal, and the Gulf Coast cities like Tampa and Naples turned into second homes for countless Canadians. 4 generations, entire family traditions revolved around this pilgrimage. South, Florida's economy grew quietly but steadily on this seasonal inflow. Millions of loyal visitors who returned year after year, treating Florida not just as a vacation spot, but as a second home. By the numbers, Canadians weren't just important, they were essential. For decades, Canada stood as Florida's #1 international tourism market, beating out the UK, Brazil, and even booming European destinations. At the peak, more than 4 million Canadians poured into Florida each year. Their spending was staggering, billions flowing into hotels, theme parks, malls, restaurants, and golf courses. And unlike many American tourists who might only pop in for a weekend getaway, Canadian families typically stayed for 2, 3, sometimes even 4 weeks at a time. They weren't just visitors, they became temporary residents, integrating into communities each winter. Per trip, Canadians often spent more than their American counterparts. They rented condos, filled vacation homes, and stocked up at local shops. From small diners in Kissimmee to real estate agents in Naples, industries quietly learned that winter survival meant one thing: Canadian customers. As one Florida business owner once said, if you ran a small diner in Kissimmee, chances are half your winter customers were Canadian. That steady, predictable stream of tourism kept businesses open, jobs alive, and communities thriving. But beyond the economics, Canadians left a cultural footprint. Restaurants and shops in tourist-heavy areas began printing bilingual menus in English and French to welcome visitors from Quebec. In Tampa and Miami, Canadian snowbirds helped fuel hockey fandom, turning Florida Panthers and Tampa Bay Lightning games into a sea of red and white jerseys every winter. On the highways, Canadian license plates became as common as Floridian ones, a visible reminder of the seasonal migration. Entire festivals, parades, and neighborhood gatherings catered specifically to Canadians, with discounts and welcome back events marking their arrival. Over the years, many Canadians went even further, buying second homes, condos, or building retirement lives in Florida. Some neighborhoods became almost mini Canada, with entire communities built around these seasonal residents. The ties were more than economic, they were emotional. For countless Canadians, Florida wasn't just a trip, it was a tradition, an extension of home. As one small business owner in Fort Lauderdale put it, our winters were Canadian. Without them, we barely survived. That bond made the sudden absence of Canadian visitors in recent years feel all the more shocking. The turning point came suddenly. For decades, Canadians had arrived faithfully, winter after winter. But starting in 2020, that tradition collapsed. The pandemic brought travel to a halt, and Canada enforced some of the strictest border controls in the world. While Florida branded itself as open for business, Canada remained cautious, with mandatory quarantines, testing requirements, and insurance nightmares for anyone thinking about traveling abroad. For 2 long years, countless Canadians lost what they called their snowbird winters. Flights were cancelled, medical coverage became uncertain, and an entire migration was frozen in place. Even when borders reopened, another storm was brewing: money. The Canadian dollar had weakened significantly against the US dollar, making every Florida purchase feel more expensive. At the same time, inflation in Florida soared. Hotel rates, vacation rentals, and even restaurant meals doubled in price. What was once an affordable luxury, 2 or 3 months, in sunny Florida, now felt like a budget breaker. Families who used to plan a 2-week trip found themselves cutting it to just a few days, or skipping Florida altogether. The equation had changed. Florida was no longer the bargain it used to be for Canadians. Beyond dollars and cents, cultural shifts added another layer of hesitation. In recent years, Florida has become a flashpoint for political debate in North America. For some Canadians, the perception of the state as increasingly extreme or hostile made them feel less welcome. Safety concerns, from rising insurance costs after devastating hurricanes to headlines about gun violence, added to the unease. The Florida dream had cracks, and for many Canadians, the sunshine no longer seemed worth the risk. And then came the competition. While Florida was growing more expensive, destinations like Mexico, Cuba, and the Dominican Republic were doubling down on affordable packages. For the price of one Florida condo rental, Canadian families could book an entire week at an all-inclusive resort, flights, food, and drinks included. Add to that the shorter flight times from Toronto or Montreal to the Caribbean compared to Orlando, and the decision became simple. Canadians, once fiercely loyal to Florida, began diversifying their winters. They found new homes in the Caribbean sun. The absence of Canadians wasn't just noticed, it was felt. Across Florida, small towns and big cities alike saw their tourism lifelines vanish. Hotels and motels that once depended on long-term Canadian snowbirds found themselves struggling with empty rooms. Restaurants, especially family-owned ones in tourist hubs like Kissimmee and Fort Lauderdale, were forced to cut staff or close their doors altogether. Even the theme parks, Disney and Universal, saw the drop. Canadians, who once packed the parks during March break, were missing in noticeable numbers. Local Florida media started sounding the alarm. Headlines asked, "Where did the Canadians go?" And communities that had quietly relied on them for decades realized just how fragile their economies had become. In Fort Lauderdale, the condo market, once a hotbed of Canadian buyers, saw a dramatic decline. Realtors who once sold dozens of properties to Canadian retirees each year suddenly found their phones silent. One of the hardest hit stories comes from a family-owned diner near Orlando. For over 40 years, it thrived on the predictable wave of Canadian snowbirds who ate there every winter, greeting staff by name and treating it like their local spot away from home. But when the Canadians stopped coming, the numbers no longer added up. The diner closed its doors for good, a small but painful symbol of how deeply intertwined Florida's economy had become with its northern neighbors, and how devastating their absence truly was. In Florida, the absence of Canadians hasn't just been numbers on a spreadsheet, it's been personal. Restaurant owners openly admit the gap. One cafe manager in Kissimmee told reporters, "Our Canadian customers were loyal. They'd eat here every winter like clockwork. We didn't even need to advertise in January. We just waited for the snowbirds to arrive." That rhythm is gone now, leaving seasonal businesses scrambling to fill the void. Realtors have echoed the same story. One in Fort Lauderdale said bluntly, "Canadians once made up 30% of our buyers. Now they've vanished." The ripple effect stretches beyond tourism into property values, development projects, and even local tax revenue. Communities that once depended on predictable Canadian demand are facing a new reality. Tourism boards have noticed too. Florida has gone on the offensive, running campaigns across Canada with slogans like, "We miss you, eh?" and "Florida is calling you back." In some towns, community leaders went as far as holding literal Welcome Back Canadians parades, desperate to remind their northern visitors that the door is still open. But when you ask Canadians why they pulled back, their answers are painfully clear. Retired snowbird couples point to skyrocketing costs. One pair who wintered in Naples for 15 years said, "Insurance and rent doubled. Florida just isn't affordable anymore." Younger Canadian families are making different calculations, trading 2 weeks in Orlando for an all-inclusive trip to Cuba or Mexico where every meal and drink is covered. For others, it's not just economics but emotion. one Canadian traveler, summed it up: Florida doesn't feel like it used to. The vibe has changed. Surveys back this up, showing a steady shift in Canadian preferences away from Florida. After decades of loyalty, many Canadians now feel abandoned, as though the state they supported for generations forgot about them the moment things got tough. And while Florida has been losing, others have been winning. Mexico and the Caribbean are seeing record-breaking Canadian arrivals. Resorts in Cancun, Varadero, and Punta Cana have become the new winter migration hubs. Even inside Canada, ski towns in British Columbia, Alberta, and Quebec are thriving, drawing families who might once have gone south. The trade-off is clear. As local Florida workers lose jobs, resorts in the Caribbean are hiring more staff to handle the surge. Airlines like Air Transat and WestJet have even shifted routes. Fewer flights to Orlando, more to tropical beaches elsewhere. Florida isn't giving up without a fight. State officials are lobbying hard for Canadians to return. Marketing campaigns have teamed up with Air Canada and WestJet, offering bundled deals to make the Sunshine State feel welcoming again. Discounts, tax incentives, and seasonal perks are back on the table. Disney and Universal have even revived special Canadian resident discounts, trying to lure back families who once saw Orlando as a rite of passage. But the challenges remain daunting. The cost of living in Florida is still high. Insurance premiums for older snowbirds continue to climb. Hurricanes and extreme weather raise new worries every season. And the political reputation of Florida isn't something a marketing campaign can erase overnight. The question remains, is it too little, too late? Florida's situation offers a bigger lesson. For decades, the state leaned too heavily on a single international market. When Canadians stopped coming, the fragility of that dependence was exposed. One political crisis, one currency dip, one global pandemic, and the entire system shook. Florida, once known as an affordable paradise, is shifting into something else entirely, a luxury playground where fewer and fewer middle-class Canadians can afford to stay. The real missed opportunity? Florida didn't adapt quickly enough when its most loyal visitors disappeared. I remember as a kid, spotting Canadian license plates on Florida highways every winter. Families from Ontario or Quebec would strike up conversations at gas stations, sharing stories about their road trip south. My own family met Canadian snowbirds at local diners, people who came back every single year like old friends. But on a recent visit, I noticed something different. The highways were quieter. The diners were emptier. And it felt like more than just an economic gap. It felt like something cultural had gone missing. It feels emptier, not just in the economy, but in the culture. Florida without Canadians isn't quite the same Florida. Can Florida win Canadians back? That's the million-dollar question. Canadians weren't just tourists. They were Florida's winter backbone. Without them, Florida faces more than a financial challenge. It faces an identity crisis. Was this just a pause in a 50-year love affair, or is it the end of an era? Florida didn't realize just how much Canadians mattered until they were gone. If you're Canadian, would you still vacation in Florida? Why or why not? And if you're Floridian, have you felt the absence of Canadian visitors in your community? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into hidden economic stories.